We're going to turn to Alcohol Change UK's community champions. We're joined by Trevor Tuig, Ian Parker and Declan Ruffin. If I could go to Trevor first, and Trevor, if you could talk to us for about 5 minutes and tell us what you've been doing. Thank you very much.
Sure thing. I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. Yeah, I mean, first thing sort of I wanted to talk about was my experience and how, you know, when my parents were immigrants to this country, and I felt that, you know, there was a real pressure, you know, to kind of for me to fit in. And I think that sort of heightened that anxiety for me. But I think that anxiety exists in all young people, in all teenagers, boys and girls. And I know this through being a teacher as well. And you know, a lot of the kids that I teach, 14, 15 years old at the moment, they're desperate for the weekend to come so they can go out and get really, really drunk. And that's their kind of goal. That's their sort of aspiration in life at the moment. But I think one way that they feel comfortable, and that I certainly felt comfortable from my experience, was alcohol, because alcohol, you know, united everybody. And I think you needed, certainly for me, growing up in southeast London in a fairly deprived area, as the doctor spoke about, alcohol is a bonding force. Not that I'm saying that's a good thing at all, it's a negative thing, but you know, and along with that, you know, you're talking about alcohol that is poor quality, cheap, you know, high alcohol content, high sugar content and things like that. And so that's kind of how I found myself getting into the cycle of addiction. And obviously with that comes other things on top of that, other addictions with that. And I think the doctor talked as well about how other drug use and so on goes hand in hand. And when that happens, obviously the alcohol use in your head becomes sort of less sinister or less dangerous, especially when the TV is telling you, you know, and music is telling you, and common culture is telling you that it's fine, alcohol's cool, you know, drink Smirnoff, it makes you sexy, you know. It's all this sort of stuff that's really kind of dangerous, not just for young people, but for all people, because I think we're all impressionable in some ways. So for me, that journey continued into football, and for my sins, I'm a West Ham season ticket holder, home and away, and sort of quitting alcohol whilst, you know, being part of the lad culture of football is virtually impossible, but something that I'm quite proud to say I managed to do. But that toxic sort of masculinity and environment that is created around, you know, being part of this sort of group, this tribal instinct, and how alcohol is sort of, you know, insidiously tied into that, is something that is very, very damaging, very dangerous, and needs to be broken. Because I think a lot of these men that we're targeting, or that we're looking to try and change, believe that alcohol is the remedy to their problems. They believe that alcohol is the cure, it's the escapism, it's going to get them out of the mundanity and the boredom that their life brings them. And certainly that's something that I struggled with, and it's very, very, very hard without the pathways that we speak of to do that. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own personal GP experience. When I started getting concerned about my problem and the fact that I wasn't going to work on a Monday because I was too hungover and stuff like that, I went to see the doctor, who made me feel, you know, really, really, really small, you know, like 2 feet tall, prescribed me beta blockers and antidepressants. I said I wasn't really depressed. I didn't think it was the right thing to do. And it didn't help. But I ended up finding Turning Point, which was in Folkestone at the time in East Kent, which is now unfortunately no longer there. And cut a long story short, you know, it didn't work and I relapsed. But during COVID, I ended up sort of stopping myself drinking. COVID was, for me, quite a nice time because I was around family and around people that I trusted and supported. But I think from my perspective, excuse me, sorry, just dropping the laptop. Sorry. Yeah, I think from my perspective, the help really and the support isn't there. There's not a great deal of literature out there that is aimed solely for the men that I think we need to target, which is the men more from working class, deprived areas, the men where alcohol is so ingrained through generations and generations of alcohol abuse that it's just really become normalized. And like I say, I'm one of the lucky ones. I managed to sort of find a route out with a lot of support from family and so on. But it's not as easy for some of those people who have, you know, I mean, difficulties. We talked about PTSD, or the doctor talks about things like that. And you know, one of my best friends suffers from PTSD. He went to Afghanistan on a tour. And for people who suffer from any form of you know, special need, or whatever it is, whether it's a mental illness, whatever it is even harder, I think, to break those chains that they sort of built around themselves, because alcohol superficially provides kind of a protective layer for these individuals. And to break that down and to show what it's truly doing, as the doctor quite vividly explained to us, it is difficult. It's difficult with individuals. So I'm aware of time. So I'm just with regards to kind of solutions, I think it's quite refreshing from my perspective to see at the Euros, which England are doing so well at, which is nice. You know, you're seeing a lot of Heineken Zero stuff that's being advertised, and there is certainly a movement in the European sense, like for the Champions League stuff. The advertising is there for you know, non-alcohol based products. However, how much that will resonate with our working class, you know, sort of football fans and those sort of deprived areas and so on, that are really the ones that kind of get neglected and left behind, I don't know. And I think that's where the real work kind of needs to be done. From my perspective, there needs to be incentives for pubs and landlords to promote and sell non-alcoholic products and target men. I think there needs to be, you know, the same markup that they would make on beer and alcohol-related products that there would be for non-alcohol-related products. We need to be pushing those types of things and really using advertising like the cigarette industry has used, which is graphic, vivid and honest and truthful about what smoking actually does to you. This needs to happen in pubs. This needs to happen in bars, you know, maybe in the toilets, etc., where, you know, men can see that, because I think a lot of it is ignorance, and I think people don't fully understand what they are doing to their mental health, let alone their physical health and so on, like the doctor said. So yeah, that is possible.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yeah, so yeah, good place.
No, it's a good place to finish, and thank you very much. I think you've got a really important voice on this, and you are, I'm from working class communities in Liverpool, generations of dock workers, and I think having that conversation in those types of communities is really, really important, as you say. So thanks very much for that contribution.
Thank you.
Ian, can I move on to you and ask you to talk about your experience for around 5 minutes?
Yeah, well, I think the most significant thing for me was both my parents were in the Second World War, and the philosophy that they came out with is you don't talk about your problems. If you feel bad, you have a drink, because alcohol was in great supply to the armed forces during then. So I had given my first drink. I was beaten up in the playground when I was 14, came back home, and my mum gave me a huge tumbler full of sherry to put it right. And I think that was the start of me seeing alcohol as the cure for bad feelings. Fast forwarding a lot, both my parents died 7 weeks apart in 1998, and they left me quite a lot of money. So I had a double dose of grief combined with enough money to drink as much as I wanted, which I think was the beginning of my real slide into alcoholism. My marriage broke up, my publishing company failed, I lost my house, it was dominoes going down. I started the climb back just over 2 years ago, because I ended up in hospital again here in Portsmouth. And I came out with a renewed determination, and I rejoined Alcoholics Anonymous, and I worked the program fully. I went to more than 90 meetings in 90 days. I engaged with my GP, and it worked. And I am now more than 2 years sober. I'm working again. I'm a boating instructor for the Navy, and the Navy has been absolutely brilliant. Surprisingly, you might hear, when I told them about it. I've restarted my freelance work, and I'm now in a position where I would suggest there was nothing ever wrong with me other than drinking alcohol, because I was a very happy teenager up to 14, and now I'm a very happy 65-year-old because I've stopped drinking alcohol. And I think many people who are alcoholic, there's nothing wrong with them other than the alcohol, and the other mental health problems are created by it. The two ways I see going forwards are we need to educate young people a lot more strongly about alcohol and drugs. But the other thing that I'm really enthused about is the increasing availability of alcohol-free versions of drinks. Because now I've re-entered the pub community and the bar community, which is a bit of a risk for an alcoholic, but I've done it. And all I do now is I drink the zero alcohol versions. So nobody can see there's any difference. I've got a pint of lager in my hand, just the same as everyone else, but there's no alcohol in it. And I think the way forward for the government is to encourage the alcohol industry to promote the alcohol-free versions. And the government needs to make it more profitable for them to do that. So I think combining better education with the promotion of alcohol-free drinks, we could see a way of turning this dreadful situation around, because most people don't see the damage that alcohol's doing, because when alcoholics get to a certain stage, they isolate. They go into a room, they only come out to go to the supermarket and buy more alcohol. So in every town, you've got thousands of people dying of alcohol in private. And that's why people don't realize how big the problem is. But I think these suggestions are a way of at least tackling some of it. That's all.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'm afraid I'm having a bit of a problem with my connection, but some images are starting to come back onto my screen. Declan, can I come to you next and ask you to tell us about your experience?
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Aaron. And thanks very much to Ian and Trevor. My name's Declan. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I, please God, I'll be 25 years sober this July, if everything goes to plan. I'm not thinking that far ahead just yet. We're not in July yet. It's lovely to be invited here to speak, and thank you very much, Natasha, for inviting me. I have a slightly different view on some of the things that have been mentioned through the time working with alcoholics, which is what I kind of do now, predominantly on top of my own job. And almost always I find that someone who is suffering from alcohol use disorder is using the alcohol or the drug as a means of treating an underlying health or mental health issue. Not always, because there are many illnesses that are created by the consumption of the alcohol, of course, as the doctor outlined, but many people use it as a means of coping, as a means for dealing with the stress in their lives. I'm working with a man at the minute, and his wife has just said, he's just told me he hates himself. And I think, you know, that was me. When I was 16, I absolutely hated everything about myself. I wasn't tall enough. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good looking enough. I wasn't smart enough. All of which were untrue. But that is what my head was telling me. My head was literally out to destroy me. And why? I don't know. I really don't know. I came from a normal family background. Outwardly, you would have said, there's nothing wrong with that guy. He's pretty normal, but I was not right inside. I simply didn't feel competent and confident, and I struggled. And I can tell you, excuse me, when I lifted a drink around about the age of 16, my life changed. The reactions in my head, the increased neurochemicals that were released, such as the dopamine and the serotonin, that I've now learned these things over the years, my brain started to regulate up a little bit. to what I perceived to be normal. I didn't realize I was living below par. Whatever was in my head, whatever way I was put together, be it the environment or be it biologically or whatever it was, I didn't feel normal. I just didn't. But when I drank, I felt normal. I could communicate. I could study better. I could relate to my friends better. I felt bigger, stronger, smarter, wiser, everything. But when the drink started to wear off, I started to go down again. So I continued this cycle. And that cycle simply continued right throughout my life and got worse. And I went through many periods of complete abstinence, but there was always another drink in the foreground, which kept me going forward and looking forward to it. And the biggest fear of all that I had was not being able to drink forever. The idea of having to stop forever was absolutely terrifying to me. And that kept me drinking. Finally, in 1996, after many trips to the hospital, and Aaron, I relate so much to the GP's problem. I now work with people and going to the GP surgery and trying to explain to him that chloride, epoxide, thiamine, some vitamin stuff, just enough to get him into treatment. Let's get him off the drink so he can get into the treatment, because they won't take you while you're drinking. And that's so tough. Some of the younger doctors just look at you and say, I'm not prescribing Librium. Sure, he's a drinker. Say, look, I understand that. I'm with him. Here's a supportive adult who will administer the Librium on the titrate dose that you tell me to take, and I'll make sure he doesn't ever have access to it himself so he can get the treatment and they won't give it to you. I finally had to take this guy to casualty, and the doctor there just was on the ball. He said, here's what you need. And I said, thank God. And he gave it to me. I took the guy home, 5 days, and he was back into treatment. He's now fully, almost recovered. When I say recovered, it's like me. Day at a time, you never fully recover. But there's a big lack of knowledge in the medical fraternity, I think, in relation to alcohol abuse and alcohol harm and what, because they don't get specifically trained on it. You can correct me, Aaron, but I don't think if you go through as a GP, there's a whole section of here's what you do with an alcoholic or a drug addict. Alcohol is the godfather of all these problems. It is a gateway drug. Everybody starts on alcohol practically. Although nowadays it's NPS, new psychoactive substances and all the kids' drugs and all the pop alcohol and all that stuff. But by and large, alcohol is always there. And if we can start to deal with the underlying issues, which is a huge, huge, huge undertaking, I know that. But it's like the guy who walked along the beach, and I'll finish on this. I said, people said to me, are you really making any difference just helping that one guy? I said, well, look, there was an old man. He was walking along the beach, and the beach had washed thousands of little starfish up onto the beach. And he slowly picked one up and he threw it in. And he picked another one up and he threw it in. And he continued to do that. And he was asked, why are you doing that? You're not making any difference. And he said, well, it made a difference to that one. And that's what I feel we need to do. Each of us have a responsibility to make a difference to the person we find who's struggling. And that's all we can do. And that's all I'm trying to do. And it's so nice to be among people who understand and feel sorry for us poor alkies, because we can get better. Honestly, thanks a lot.
Declan, thank you. Thanks so much. And just thank you to the three of you, because they're three wonderful, inspiring stories, full of knowledge and self-knowledge, I think.